Hey everyone, I'm so excited to share this episode of the Building Thinkers podcast with you. I talked with Hanna Finissi, and we had a wonderful conversation focused on one of my 12 favorite problems. How might be where your feet are become my primary way of being? And let me just go ahead and tell you right now, Hanna has made it central to her life's work to find this presence, flow, and balance as a meditation coach, well-being facilitator, and owner of Soul Trust Ignite. Hanna's on a mission to ignite inner knowing through introspective self-discovery and interactive community connection. In this episode, we talked about the impact of conditioned beliefs, the pressure to conform to societal expectations, and a lot of other things that can make this idea of being present really challenging, including unpacking some of our own personal experiences. We talked about what mindfulness really means to Hanna and how this practice of paying attention on purpose can truly amplify happiness and reduce those patterns of rumination, thinking about the past or future. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Hanna Finissi. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today I'm so excited to be joined by
Hanna Finissi of Soul Trust Ignite.
Wonderful. Hanna, thank you so much for joining. Let's start with, how did we get connected? Any sort of story around that?
Yeah, I think of just a good mutual friend. Romy Salman is near and dear to my heart. We're friends, we've facilitated together, and she's just one of those people that I feel like we're always kind of thinking about each other and connecting people together. So yeah, she's a special human to me, and I'm so grateful that she was able to introduce me to you.
Yes, wonderful. Romy was raving about you. And so now I'm so excited to get to connect and have this conversation. And one of the things we also like to start with is this idea on building thinkers. We're going to zoom in on a couple different things, but we're going to focus around one of my 12 favorite problems, which this particular one is extra near and dear to me personally. The idea of how might we really be where our feet are. And so we're going to zoom in on that. And then I also like to ask at the beginning, really, what is it that you build? How did you get to doing the work that you're doing now? And any sort of way you want to get there. I know we'll dive deeper into some of that, but can you share with us a little bit of your story of what brought you to the work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I always am like, oh my gosh, there's so much to share. Where do I begin? And I think the best way in is just providing kind of a overview, and then throughout the conversation we'll get more into the details. I was born and raised in a suburb outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in a loving, large family. I don't know where you're from, Tracy, but if you are familiar with New England and the prep school vibe, I like to say
I actually went to a really intense college preparatory school as well, but in
Oh my
Houston,
gosh.
Texas. But
Okay.
but I understand the prep school. It's like, yeah, the ones in the movies. That's where I went.
Yeah, so um, that was my MO growing up. I like to say like overachiever and people pleaser was a tie for my middle name, and in the area of academics and athletics particularly. And so I really grew up not I mean, I had an amazing childhood, but in retrospect, right, when you look back and you look at the pieces, I really didn't know who I was at my core and like what made me special and unique, because I was always outsourcing those things and those decisions to my parents, to my college counselors, to my friends. And it really wasn't until I moved, after college. I lived in Colorado. I lived in the Bahamas for a little bit, which we'll get into later. And I moved back home, back to Boston. And it was one of those like, okay, I should be here, right? This is just kind of what I should do. Like, we just moved back home, and I got a nonprofit job in Boston, was living in a brownstone apartment, everything was fine. I was so lucky to have a circle of great friends, was running marathons. But there was a piece of me that was really deeply unfulfilled and unhappy. And this was like a really depressive time of my life where I was living this life that I thought I should be living
Mm.
and not the life that I was designing for myself.
Mm.
So I went to the doctor's office complaining of this heaviness on my chest, was prescribed an inhaler, friends recommended antidepressants, and like walking out of that doctor's office, I was just like, this, I was just craving an inside out approach to healing.
Mm.
And so that really catapulted my own personal journey into meditation and into well-being and personal discovery and really figuring out who I am from the inside out. And that catapulted into now it becoming my career, and really obsessed with my continual learning and development and growth, and also holding that space for others as they kind of hop off the treadmill of the should life that they have been conditioned to live and get in the driver's seat and take some ownership.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your story and what's brought you to the work that you're doing now. One thing that came up for me in listening is, what do you see or any ahas you've had around those messages and the stories that we kind of hear in, as you described, not necessarily like a negative childhood, but that sense of I should do this or that. As you pulled that apart and as you have been healing, do you have any specific insights on like where we can start to notice that for ourselves, or maybe even the parental hat of where we might create that cycle again in our children if we're not watching the ways we speak to it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in the beginning of my personal discovery journey, it's a lot of reflecting on childhood and, okay, what is mine that I'm choosing to carry with me? And what is mine that I'm choosing to let go of? And I think what I had resisted for so long was that I had anything to heal from,
Mm.
or that
Mm-hmm.
I deserved a healing journey. I
Mm.
grew up with everything I could ever want and access to everything I could ever need. And so, to that person who's listening, who grew up with
Mm.
everything you could ever need, like, you too deserve to heal. You too picked up on conditioned beliefs. I mean, from ages 0 to 7, we are living out of the theta brainwaves, which is the state of hypnosis. So we're like sponges, essentially figuring out what we need to do to receive love, safety, and belonging.
Mm.
And that's for every single person, no matter where you grew up or what you had access to.
Mm. And so, what do you see as some of the signs if our listeners are, as they're considering, what are some of the things that you start to notice? So, for you, it was physical sensation, physical recognition, and emotional and mental that were clear signs. What are some of the things, maybe this in your client work now? What are some of the reasons why people come to you for this healing journey and recognize, wow, I want to do this work?
Yeah, there is always some semblance of curiosity there.
Mm.
And a lot of times it is like asking me more about my journey, which almost gives people permission to step into their own journey, their own work, their own shadow work, their own limiting beliefs. And another piece is really paying attention to where your mind goes when you're dreaming. And daydreaming counts. Like, where does your mind go when you're sitting at your 9 to 5 job in your office, totally zoning out, like very much not being where your feet are? And for me, I would have these visions of running through fields in the mountains. And I was just like, man, like, how do I get closer to that version of me? Because if you can dream it, you can create it. It's already in your space. So really tuning into and allowing yourself to dream.
Right. So I hear in that there is this, we're going to talk about being where your feet are, but there is this power in that of recognizing when you're not being where your feet are, where it's taking you. This is going to sound kind of meta, I think, but then so that you can get closer to that reality being where your feet are. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. Yep. That's the power of setting an intention and releasing the outcome of, okay, something here is possible for me, right? Something in this space that might not be exactly what I'm creating in my brain, but I know if I move in that direction, I'll get closer to how I want to feel. I'll get closer to how I want to show up every day in my life.
You're making me think, just personally, in the last couple years, I've done a pretty big shift in the work that I've been doing. And in retrospect, I can see the alignment of all of it and the through line. However, it felt like a pretty large shift in who my clients were, the kind of the percentage of each of the clients. I went from one pretty full-time client while it's been in my own business, but to much more diversification on as a part of several teams. And in that work, so many times when I have been dreaming about what my company would look like, dreaming about the type of work that I would do, I could see, as you're describing, it wasn't quite fields and mountains, but it was very specific types of, I do a lot of learning experience design, a lot of strategic consulting in this potential space. And I could envision, down to like seeing some of the activities, the type of projects where I really wanted to help unlock human potential for social impact organizations. And as I would fall asleep and kind of thinking about these things, it's really powerful for me to recognize now, as you're speaking, how those things have come to be. Some of those projects that I envisioned, I'm getting to play out now. And then I'm now kind of shifting and seeing where that reality allows me to have so much just gratitude to now be where my feet are in getting to do the work that was imagined as reality. I don't know if I have a question that goes to there, but I'm just seeing that sense of power in the intention, manifestation. I think you said a moment ago, if you can dream it, it's already, did you say it's already within you?
Yeah, it's already in your space to create. It's like, okay, it's there.
Right.
It's
And
absolutely
then
there, and it's just waiting to be realized.
right. And that's how I think a lot of times about potential and about maybe possibility is another word that's connected to that. And so I find that is why, writing and exploring and sketching or whatever methodology of putting some language and structure maybe to that dream allows us to almost hold it at arm's length and look at it and reflect on it, and then put more structure to what are the steps maybe to bring it into reality. I'm wondering if you have any other insights around that piece of the how we go from the dream and the possibility into the actionability. I saw one of the notes that you made was about how in the wellness space, there's a lot of lack of implementation, that maybe it stays a little high level. And so maybe there's a connection to that. But what do you think in that area?
Yeah, I think So many things. And this actually comes from my experience as a facilitator with that critical step of implementation and
Yes.
integration, right? Like after an awesome full day workshop, if you just walk out of those doors and continue your life as it was before that experience, then what's the point?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, how are we taking these experiences and like gleaming those golden nuggets that we can choose to implement and integrate into our daily lives? And like I always say, like my hope is that Soul Trust Ignite and our offers are like picking up a self-help book off the bookshelf, finding that really like potent piece for you and choosing an implementation strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's in a one-on-one session, whether that's in a workshop, or whether that's in a retreat.
Mm. And in comparison to so many times, let's say the self-help book just off the shelf without the implementation, what's at stake when we go down that road?
Lack of ownership of your own life. A huge amount is at stake. And it's really sad when the self help book goes back on the bookshelf. You're like, that was cute, you know, good story. Maybe I'll pick it up next year, but just gonna tuck it back next to that other one that was recommended to me and continue my life as usual with these ideas and perceptions from my childhood that I still haven't revisited. And I'm just living out of that reality of who I should be and how I should show up.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I see it from kind of the learning lens from the space that I'm in, which is very much aligned, of course, that I see almost the formula for learning, which I share in some of my workshops as input plus output raised to the power of feedback. And the input is what we think about as learning, just kind of traditionally. Oh, I'm going to listen to something. I'm going to listen to a podcast. I'm going to watch a video. I'm going to go to a workshop. And ideally, high quality workshops have all of that. They have input and output and the feedback. But that output of doing something with it, to your point here, we're talking about implementation, taking the strategies and trying them. Like that's where we see so much more power in the learning, going from maybe head knowledge to a full, maybe embodied experience in the work that you're doing. And then I've kind of hung on to this idea of raised to the power of feedback. It becomes even more exponential or accelerated as we get feedback. And here, I think with what we're speaking to can be our own feedback, our own trust and alignment and understanding of how we're feeling. And I wonder if also in your work, there's a place for the relationship with others as part of that feedback of the further self work that's done. For example, I've done 4 years of therapy and I have a friend who is a therapist, and we were walking one day and I was just kind of reflecting out loud, I think sinking some affirmation from her that I had grown, that she could see that. And she was like, absolutely. And she went so far that I was like, oh, wow. It must have felt a bit of anxiety to be with me because I was wrestling so much with anxiety before that time. It was powerful to hear that feedback. And also, upon reflection, some sadness for how long it took me to recognize that piece in my own healing journey, there of the possibility and potential. I had many of the same realizations that you're speaking to from the culture that I was in and from the should life of expectations that I thought I was owning, that I thought I was in the driver's seat regarding, but I hadn't at that time unpacked the what was behind those choices. I also played lacrosse in college, which I saw somewhere in your notes
Oh,
about
no way.
club lacrosse. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So that was
I was a
part of my
laxer.
my should was I got an opportunity to play D1 lacrosse, and I didn't think at the time. I was playing in Texas, and so we were just starting really lacrosse programs. In fact, I had a boys lacrosse stick for my first like 2 years of lacrosse because we
Wow.
didn't even have girls lacrosse sticks available, which for our listeners, the boys lacrosse stick, you can look it up, is very different. There's like a large pocket. It's very different. So I went to camp in Maryland in 8th grade with my boys lacrosse stick, and they were like, what is happening? So of course I got most improved player, the coveted award for anybody. You were terrible and you improved from your, and I won a lacrosse stick because they probably just felt so bad that this Texas girl has this boys lacrosse stick. But I went on to play at the University of Richmond in Virginia, and I think that is one of those stories where I can really see that at the time I just thought that was the end all be all, that I could go somewhere and play and it would be D1. And I had a wonderful experience there in many ways. And then also the realization that that was not where I needed to be for 4 years. And so ultimately left and stepped away. But I see that as so many ideas of what that should look like throughout it. And then even the choice to leave felt like such the ultimate failure to me at the time, at which I can now see as so many doors that were opened from that choice to step away from 8 hours a day of film lift conditioning, like to sit on the bench. Let's be
Yeah. Oh
clear.
my gosh. I totally relate 100%. Um, I also walked onto a D1 lacrosse team
No way.
at Colgate University. It was something I was clinging onto for my life
Mm,
because, and what I'm hearing from you too is like this identity as an athlete was
100%.
everything. That was who I was. And if I
Mm,
was showing up at a new school without that identity, like, no, thank you. Who was I? Who was I
mm,
even if I didn't have that? And so when I made the team, and I played for 2 years and then chose to step off of the team, I was so happy that I had made the team so
mm,
that I could maintain that identity. Not because I loved the sport of lacrosse.
mm.
Like, I haven't picked up a lacrosse stick since I left the sport. And so, with that, is that evolution of identity.
Yeah. Oh, this is so interesting. You're making me think about, yes, that identity that I put on. And at the University of Richmond, a small school. And so my identity became even more wrapped up in lacrosse because these are all my best friends. The baseball boys were all of our boyfriends and best friends and like
Yep.
brothers. And you eat together, watch film together. And then when I chose to step off of the team, my whole identity was changed. And that was part of why I needed to go. I loved the university. I had no idea who I was at that university without my lacrosse sweatshirt. Even professors saw us as the athletes. And that was a whole nother journey to navigate. Like, no, 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 I academically got in on my own. Please do not classify me as an athlete on this front because I want to have a 4.0. But another side of my academic identity, I
Yes.
want like academic All-American. That was like my contribution to the team was like Tracy will get good grades. I think maybe in retrospect that's why I was recruited. Now I'm curious about is when I look back, this was actually not my parents that pushed this upon me. They'll tell these stories of how in kindergarten I like put myself to bed and I somehow around everything took it on. It was not forced upon me from them. However, I did grasp it. And so I wonder if that was true for you too, or if you felt the parental involvement was a piece of it.
Actually, I feel very similarly. I was so driven from an early age, and I was like researching different club teams to try out for. I was driving my dad all over Tarnation to try out for this team. And at one point, I was playing in tennis tournaments all over the place. And they fully supported me, but I was absolutely the
Mhm.
driver behind it. And it was what I was noticing
Mm-hmm.
in my community of
Mm-hmm.
the varsity athletes at my high school. Like, those are the people that you want to be and the people you want to hang out with. And the people that get an early decision to Harvard is like, whoa, okay, people are impressed by them. And so it's these subliminal messages that are kind of baked into the communities that we grow up in. And a lot of the time, they're not direct messages from our primary caregivers, but our subconscious is always at work and figuring out, like, okay, I'm good at this, or I got this type of validation, so I'm going to keep going in this direction.
Mm. Hannah, I'm wondering if you can tell us the story of the Bahamas and where this term "be where your feet are" came into practice for you.
Yes, I am so glad that this is a phrase that you have embraced as well, because it is everything. And I love how you say, like, how can this become my primary way of being?
Mm.
I think that is so special, because one of my favorite quotes by Eckhart Tolle is, the present moment is all you ever have. There is never a time when your life is not this moment. And so I learned about this phrase, be where your feet are, when I was teaching at a semester study abroad school in the Bahamas called the Island School. It's a 100-day semester program where juniors and sophomores come to have this experience of living on a small island in the Bahamas, learning about sustainability, learning how to challenge themselves physically and mentally, and to really explore a new way of being. Students have their phones taken away, so they don't have access to that immediate feedback that we often do in our daily lives. And the dean of the school, who is a really good friend of mine, Liz, would always repeat this phrase, inviting students and staff to be where your feet are. And so as students were ruminating about, like, boyfriends and girlfriends back home, or as staff were thinking about, like, what's my next job going to be after this opportunity, it was always that invitation to come back to this moment, literally grounding our reality in our physical presence, like where our feet are. We made this choice. We get to invite our full presence to be here now, and really, like, invite our mind to get on board with our physical bodies. So that was a sentiment that I learned from Liz that is now something that I incorporate in everything that I do. It's one of my guidelines in every workshop that I facilitate, is that invitation to be here, right?
I love that. And I am now thinking about the other part of that phrase, the way I wrote the question like that. How can it be my primary way of being? Because I recognize I have moments of it. And now that I have the awareness, but I also have other moments where I'll get back swept up into the what ifs or the wonderings of life and work and clients and the gratitude of all the opportunities that I have. And yet there's can be pressure associated with, of course, having your own business and a family and all of those things, that it is in particular really important to me when I am in that liminal space in between working and mom life. That is when I really think about, okay, I be where your feet are comes to me a lot when I am playing Legos,
Mm.
because it is easy to be fake playing Legos for anybody that plays Legos with their children. I have two boys, And they always give me all the animals because they know mom loves the animals. So I have like all the little animals and move them around. But there's a difference in being where my feet are and really getting into the storyline of Legos that we're involved in, and they know the difference. So when I'm in the role of mom with my children, when my mind starts to go somewhere else, that is the phrase I say to myself. And so this idea of the primary way of being, I think, is how does that even more become my immediate response? I think that that's where I'm looking for ongoing growth in. I intellectually understand, and there are many times where that is the case. I can shift there, but I'd love for it to be even more of the default setting in my mind. I don't know if you have any feedback for me on how that is changed in your own life or in your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what that phrase really represents in a quite literal way is the invitation to be mindful, which is like paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally.
I think that part's key, the non-judgmental.
Yeah, that quote is from Jon Kabat-Zinn. He's kind of the founder of mindfulness meditation. And it really does allow you to be exactly where you are, allow whatever emotional circumstance you're having to exist, because you can't be anywhere else. You can be wishing you're somewhere else, but unless you fully embrace the now, then it's going to be really hard to get to where you're going. And I think there's two. Well, for me, I practice mindfulness through a daily meditation practice. And that is exercising your mindfulness muscle so that you can live a life of peace and fulfillment and mindfulness outside of the practice. Mm-hmm. So with a mindfulness meditation, you're simply acknowledging the thoughts, right? We are complex humans with these amazing brains that have capacity to think, and choosing not to go down the rabbit hole of the thought, noticing it, and like literally exercising your mindfulness muscle to come back to your anchor, whether that's your breath, whether that's a felt emotion, or whether sometimes that's a mantra. So having that, like for you, even in real time of playing Legos, it's like, okay, I'm noticing, what am I going to cook for dinner? Or what am I going to do for this next client? And it's like, okay, for you, it sounds like your mantra is be where your feet are. Come back to this moment, Tracy, because you can't be anywhere else. So you might as well fully be here.
Yeah, I think that idea, that final piece that you said there of you might as well be here, I think that there is some sort of like part of the facade of worry and our mind going to those other places that somehow we can resolve it, we can fix that next thing. That's a false narrative, and I think pulling that apart has been really helpful for me too, even just from an efficiency standpoint of it actually doesn't help resolve. And I'm just missing, I'm kind of have a shadow of, if for example the play with my children, it's a shadow of what the experience could be if I was not fully present. This is also making me think about one of the questions that I find insightful is, what is it about this idea of be where your feet are and mindfulness and the work that you do where that people overcomplicate? And the sentence stem I like here is, if only people knew, when it comes to this, what we've been talking about. What would you say to that?
I would say only people knew that your happiness amplifies when you live in the present moment. And that invitation to be fully present allows us to let go of these ruminations about the past, allows us to let go of any anxiety about the future that we have very little control over. You will amplify your happiness. I actually think meditation and mindfulness is in a really cool space right now because a lot of modern science is catching up to
Yes.
these ancient tools. And a study that was done by two psychologists at Harvard, Killingsworth and Gilbert, the study was called A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. Have you heard this study before?
Mm-hmm.
I'll repeat it for the listeners that haven't heard it, but essentially, they collected 250,000 data points tracking real time happiness and feelings about what people were doing in their everyday life in the present moment. And the result is that we spend almost half of our time, 46.9% of our time, thinking about something other than our immediate surroundings. And that is so striking to me that we spend half of our time thinking about other things other than the present moment, other than what is the only thing that exists right now. And the only way to rectify that is to invite ourselves to be where our feet are.
It's so powerful. And Hannah, it's making me think about our moment in time in 2024. And I'm thinking about the quote, I think this is Herbert Simon. He talks about having a wealth of information, but a poverty of attention. And just how bombarded we are with messages, in particular from our devices and our screens. The invitation there all the time, I would guess it's a very high percentage of the messages we're receiving there, unless they are like mindfulness and what we're specifically talking about, are inviting us away from where our feet are. Buy this thing. You are somehow incomplete if you don't have this next thing, or be where somebody else's feet are and explore their vacation through Instagram. Or, the answer is in organizing your pantry. And I love a good organizing, and it does bring joy. So no shame there. There will always be another thing to get done, to ruminate on, to figure out. Like, our to-do list is never fully complete. John Acuff, an author, says our imagination is bigger than our calendar. And so we're always thinking, and that can be a really wonderful thing as we maybe put some guardrails around it and really consider what's our purpose and what are those things we want to be doing and spending our time with, that we've talked about kind of our own recognition that maybe the journey and the version of success we wanted for our life was very different than indicators of success we were taught in our environment. What I'm curious about here, because I've also seen where science is catching up with a lot of this, my own morning practices around contemplative practice and prayer and journaling. And that's where I practice some of what we're speaking to try to carry it then throughout the day and come back to these quotes and scripture and things that are in my mind that I hold as part of my anchor that you're speaking to. What do you see in the larger environment now? Maybe this comes to some of your client work that is inhibiting. Why is it hard to do this work? What kind of stands in our way as modern humans from recognizing that maybe we have work to do here?
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, definitely lots of thoughts circulating. I think the first thing that struck me is the sentiment of I'll be happy when. And I think we're all faulty of that to some degree, myself included, right? I'll be happy when my business gets to a certain standard. I'll be happy when we finally move to Montana. I'll be happy when. And there are these things that we're waiting on in order to achieve a feeling, whether it's happiness, whether it's peace, fulfillment, insert however you want to feel there. And I think that is really plaguing our present moment awareness, because we have the invitation to look around and say, oh man, this journal, like this brings me so much happiness, right? Like I can feel that happiness right now. And it's not that we want certain things. We want certain things because we think those things will make us feel a certain way. So flip the script and practice feeling that way, and then let those situations magnetize to you. Maybe it's what you've been dreaming, and maybe it's something even more expansive and better that hasn't like hit your fields of reality quite yet. Why aren't more people diving into the work? And I think that's a really like simply complicated answer, and it's because there's fear there. There's a lot of fear in opening Pandora's box when you don't know exactly what you're going to find. And so you look around and you're like, life is fine. I don't need to open that box. I'm good. I'll just keep on keeping on. And that's the reality of most humans in our modern day world. And it's no one's fault, because what we have been operating until up until our current age is familiar for us. If it's familiar for us, that is safe. So if we choose to open Pandora's box that's entirely unfamiliar, we don't know what's going to be in there, that's not something that is safe for us. And that's just an ancient survival of the fittest ism, where humans are drawn to what is safe and familiar, because that has kept us alive until now.
That's making me think about how the brain likes that homeostasis. It likes to know. It likes to protect us. And so on the other side of the unknown, quitting our job for something else, quitting lacrosse for us and transferring or staying, ending a relationship that isn't the right fit. These things that we don't know what's on the other side of, to your point, seem so scary to us because from an evolutionary perspective, they are. We don't know. And what I think is interesting when I have a lot of these conversations in my friend group and I would say with clients too sometimes, that it's a facade that in that place where we think is secure, that it is actually secure. I think the last several years have also shown us this. People that thought the companies that they work for would always care for them, they were like a family and all these things, send them an email that their services were no longer needed and their email would be disconnected by the end of the day. It has been an ongoing theme across the podcast conversations that I've had with people in all different spaces, this kind of ongoing recognition and awakening, the idea of designing our lives and really considering our purpose and the type of impact we want to have and the type of relationships we want to have, and then making the choices that then are maybe in alignment with that work. I don't know if you've seen any of that to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you're speaking to, just that facade of safety just because it's been familiar. We get to pull those things apart. And we get to say, oh man, starting a new business feels so scary. Yes. Like there is so much fear there. There is nothing that feels safe about that. That is entirely unfamiliar for me. And what's the next nudge, right? The next right step that I can take to push through that fear, right? To be scared and take an aligned action anyways. And that is really, really brave. The Soul Trust Ignite methodology in general, which I'll just explain really quickly,
Yes.
is you have to start with your soul, this reconstruction of your identity, fall in love with who you were made to be. And then the middle part is trust, building a relationship of trust with your truest, most authentic self, right? You can know it, but then it's totally different when you can trust it and you can own it. And then the last piece of this methodology is ignite. That's when you get to take these brave, inspired, aligned actions that are in harmony with your soul and with your values. And even though it feels scary, there's that semblance of alignment that feels true to you.
That's so beautiful, Hannah. I love that because if I go back to the very beginning, you and I were both taking a lot of actions. Like we were going for the club team, going on the walk on the D1 team, getting our grades where they were and all of that. There was a lot of action, but that inspired and aligned action comes from this different place and then allows, like the word that's coming to me is sustainability, that there's a sense of peace and methodical growth or something around that, where it's not negative to grow and to act and to be driven. I've wrestled with this a little bit with undoing some of that and like the hustle culture and all of that, and I'm still a very driven person. This topic is important current thinking for me because I am wrestling with this, like the hustle culture and go 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 do, but I'm still a very driven person. I love goals, I love progress, and I think that maybe the protection around sustainability is the alignment, the inspired and aligned actions. There's nothing wrong with the doing, there's nothing wrong with the desire to achieve, but it is this stepping back and asking why, and asking to what end, and asking for whom. Is that how you see that piece? This is a very selfish question because I'm just thinking about this, like coming to terms with the hustle culture and yet, like, I do like to hustle sometimes, Hannah. Is that okay?
Yes, I love this question. And I am right there with you. I am in this figuring it out too of how can I take these aligned, inspired actions? And what you're saying is so spot on, is that, of course, take the inspired, aligned actions and just make sure that it's in alignment with your soul and that you trust that version of yourself enough to be brave enough to take those actions. A phrase that I've been playing around with and doing some writing on is this element of graceful grit. And I think that kind of speaks to what we're experiencing of like, I've got big dreams and I can't wait for them to be realized. And I have this reminder to come back to my soul and to release any specific timeline and find that like qualia of graceful grit that will always lead me in the direction of my dreams.
Hannah, that's really powerful. I think that language is really helpful. I think language, of course, and mantras and these phrases can help us capture what we're after there. Okay, I could talk to you all day, but we need to get to wrapping up in the direction of, Hannah, will you share with us some book recommendations, podcast recommendations, and then also share a little bit about a little bit more about your business, where people can find you and all of that. So maybe start with books and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm loving this conversation. I feel like I could just keep chatting. Um, Book recommendations: Frequency by Penny Pierce, The Inner Matrix by Joey Klein, and The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer are my top 3 right now that I would recommend.
And podcasts or any other input?
Podcasts right now, I've been loving the Expanded podcast, which is from Lacey Phillips and the To Be Magnetic community, all about manifestation. Where Should We Begin? Esther Perel is really awesome about relationships and examining partnerships, friendships, all of the relationships we have in our life. And then the Michael Singer podcast is really awesome. He shared something the other day that was essentially like about suffering, and we create what we want and then we suffer when it's not that way. So just this aspect of like, we're creating our own suffering and we don't have to do that.
Really powerful. You wrote something in the notes that I would love to dive into, and then I'd love for you to share more about your business and the type of clients you're working with. But you wrote about how you think about learning and course experiences. Would you like to summarize that, of how you think about exploring a new learning experience or a coaching experience? Because there's so much out there, and we're both in this space too. We offer the things.
Yes. Yes, there is so much out there, and I am guilty of the one-click bait, buy the program that will change your life, and sit in a room alone and go through these modules that you'll actually never finish. So I always recommend like having some semblance of accountability when you're stepping into something that you want to learn about, especially personal growth and self-discovery, and doing it with a coach who can hold your hand, who can hold you accountable, who can recommend resources, who has the knowledge, the expertise, and experience to support you like in a really robust and loving way, just like you would hire a coach when you're going to run a marathon. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do this alone. If you have the capacity and the financial means, find someone who you really connect with and allow them to guide you and be on this journey alongside you.
And I think that connects to what we were speaking to earlier around some of these programs miss the mark on implementation and integration. And that's what, to your point, working with a coach, getting clarity on the front end for what is it that you're trying to accomplish with whatever this experience is. We want it to ultimately come back into our lives and not stay in the course experience, where sometimes it can when it's not designed with that intentionality. I think Romy would agree with us here on the experiential aspect of it and the long-term it coming into our lives. Okay, Hannah, may you please remind folks your current business, where people can find you, what kind of clients are you taking on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. My business is Soul Trust Ignite. You can find me on Instagram at Soul Trust Ignite or on my website, soultrustignite.com. And I am a great resource for meditation coaching. I have a one-on-one 3-month program, and I also have group programs. So if you're interested in meditation and personal development, manifestation, growth, like I geek out on this stuff. I'm obsessed, and I work with a lot of people who are experiencing transitions in their life and really helping them to find some footing, do some of that unwiring so that they can unlock a life that you deserve, honestly. I would love to share with your listeners an exclusive mindfulness meditation. It's just a 10-minute practice, and it really speaks to this essence of be where your feet are. So if you're listening to this and you're curious of like Man, I would love a practice that I can dig into. Just DM me meditation and I'll share the link for free for you. Would love to know if you do it, how it lands. And I also have a 90-minute one-on-one intensive called Soul Print, where we really dig into who are you? How can we peel back those layers of the onion so that you can create goals that are in alignment with your soul? And then if you're curious about more of my 3-month, like really a robust one-on-one support, we can absolutely hop on a clarity call to see if you might be a good fit.
Wonderful. Hannah, I'm going to put all of those links and information in the episode description so everybody's got that as well. I just want to thank you so much for your time, for your presence and insights, and I look forward to staying connected on the onlines and just hearing more about your incredible work and business. So thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.